What if the very thing you were most proud of, the one ability that made you who you are, the gift you believed God Himself placed in your hands, was taken from you in a single instant? What would be left? Who would you be? Dr. Marcus Chin knew exactly who he was. He was the man with the golden hands. And for 20 years, those hands had been his identity, his purpose, his gospel, and his God. But he did not know that last part yet. He would not know it until the night those hands were destroyed. And what he discovered after he lost them would change not only his life, but the lives of thousands of people who had given up on miracles. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. First, you need to meet Marcus Chin at the height of his glory, because you cannot understand the depth of the valley until you have seen the peak of the mountain. The surgical wing of Seattle Pacific Medical Center was, by any measure, one of the finest cardiac surgery units in the Western Hemisphere. State-of-the-art operating rooms with robotic assistance systems, a nursing staff that had been recruited from the best programs in the country, a research department that published more papers per year than some entire hospitals. And at the center of it all, like the sun at the center of a solar system, was Dr. Marcus Chin, 42 years old, chief of cardiac surgery, Stanford undergraduate, Johns Hopkins medical degree, fellowship at the Cleveland Clinic, author of 37 peer-reviewed papers, and a revolutionary technique for minimally invasive mitral valve repair that bore his name, the Chin procedure. He had been featured on the cover of Time magazine under the headline, "The Man Who Holds Hearts." He had been profiled in the New Yorker, interviewed on 60 Minutes, and invited to speak at medical conferences on 4 continents. And in 20 years of practice, he had performed over 10,000 surgeries with a success rate that was, statistically speaking, almost inhuman, 98.7%. In a field where a 95% success rate was considered world-class, Marcus Chin was in a category of his own. His colleagues called him Golden Hands. It had started as a nickname among the surgical residents, whispered in the hallways after they watched him perform a 14-hour operation to repair a baby's heart. A baby whose parents had been told by 3 other surgeons that there was nothing to be done. Marcus had done it anyway. The baby survived. The parents wept. The residents watched Marcus peel off his surgical gloves with a quiet, satisfied precision and walk out of the operating room, as if he had just completed a routine oil change, instead of the most complex pediatric cardiac procedure anyone in the hospital had ever witnessed. "Golden Hands," they murmured, and the name stuck. It was printed on a plaque that his department gave him at the annual gala. It was embroidered on a custom surgical cap that his wife Sarah had made for him as a joke that was not entirely a joke. It became part of the mythology of Seattle Pacific Medical Center. Part of the story the hospital told donors and board members and prospective patients. Come to our hospital. We have golden hands, and Marcus loved it. He would never have admitted this, not to Sarah, not to his colleagues, not even to himself in the quiet of his own thoughts. But he loved it. He loved the way people looked at him when he walked through the hospital corridors, the way residents straightened up when he entered the room, the way patients grabbed his hands, these famous hands, and held them against their cheeks and said, "You're going to save me, aren't you, doctor?" He loved the power that came with being the best, the certainty, the control. He loved being the one person in any room who could do what no one else could do. And somewhere in the 20 years between his first surgery and his 10,000th, a shift had occurred, so gradual that Marcus did not notice it, so subtle that no one around him noticed it either. A shift from gratitude to ownership, from stewardship to sovereignty, from "God gave me these hands" to "These hands are mine." Marcus went to church. He and Sarah attended Grace Community Church in Bellevue every Sunday, sat in the 3rd row on the left, gave generously, and shook hands with the pastor on the way out. Marcus could speak the language of faith fluently. He bowed his head during prayer. He said amen at the right moments. When reporters asked him about his extraordinary success rate, he would smile humbly and say, "I believe God works through these hands. I'm just the instrument." It was a beautiful answer. It was the answer that made Christian media outlets invite him for interviews and churches invite him for guest testimonies. It was the answer that people wanted to hear. And Marcus had learned long ago that giving people the answer they wanted to hear was a form of currency more valuable than money. But the truth that Marcus, buried beneath layers of professional accomplishment and public humility and Sunday morning performance, was simpler and darker. He did not really believe it anymore. Not the way he had believed it at 22, fresh out of Stanford, kneeling in his dorm room and praying, "God, use my hands. Make me a healer. Let me serve you through medicine." That prayer had been real. That young man had been sincere. But 20 years of success had done what 20 years of failure could not. They had convinced Marcus Chen that he did not need God, that the talent was his, that the precision was earned, not given, that the 10,000 lives he had saved were monuments to his own skill, his own discipline, his own extraordinary, irreplaceable, golden hands. Sarah knew. She had watched the transformation the way you watch a glacier move. Too slow to see in any single moment, but unmistakable over time. She had watched her husband's prayers grow shorter. She had watched his Bible move from the nightstand to the bookshelf to the box in the closet. She had watched him check his phone during sermons, answer emails during worship, and excuse himself from small group because he had a paper to review. She had watched the man she married, the man who used to pray over his patients before surgery, who used to write scripture references on his surgical cap, who used to come home from the hospital and say, "Sarah, God did something incredible today." She had watched that man disappear behind a wall of achievement and be replaced by someone who looked the same, but was hollow in the middle. She had tried to talk to him about it. Once over dinner she had said, "Marcus, when was the last time you really prayed? Not bowed your head, not said grace, but really talked to God?" He had looked at her with a flash of irritation that he quickly covered with a smile. "I talk to God every day, Sarah. Every time I save a life, that's a prayer." It was a clever answer. It was the kind of answer that sounds profound until you hold it up to the light and realize it is made of glass. Sarah had not pushed further. Instead, she had done what she always did when she was worried about Marcus. She went to the kitchen after he fell asleep, sat at the table in the dark, and prayed. "Lord, he's drifting. I can feel him drifting. He still says your name, but he doesn't mean it anymore. Please, Father, don't let him get so far from you that he can't find his way back. Whatever it takes. Please, whatever it takes." It is a dangerous prayer. Perhaps the most dangerous prayer a person can pray, because God takes it seriously. And what it took in the case of Dr. Marcus Chen was not a gentle nudge, or a quiet whisper, or a Sunday sermon that happened to hit close to home. What it took was a snowy highway and a pair of headlights and a sound like the end of the world. What it took was the destruction of the very thing Marcus loved most. Because sometimes when we will not let go of the idol voluntarily, God has to pry our fingers open. And that is not cruelty. It is surgery. The most painful, most necessary, most loving surgery there is. But Marcus did not know any of this yet. On the evening of December 24th, as he stood at the scrub sink, washing his golden hands after another successful operation, humming Silent Night without thinking about the words, he had no idea that this was the last surgery those hands would ever perform. He had no idea that in 3 hours, on a frozen highway outside Seattle, everything he believed about himself and about God was about to be shattered. And he had no idea that the shattering was not the end of his story. It was the beginning. Christmas Eve in Seattle is a particular kind of beautiful. The city glows. The Space Needle wears a crown of lights. The ferries on Puget Sound look like floating Christmas trees, and the snow, when it comes, turns the steep hills of the city into a scene from a postcard that no one would believe was real. It was snowing that night. Not the polite, decorative snow that Seattle usually gets, the kind that melts on contact and turns to slush by morning. This was real snow. Heavy, thick, relentless snow, falling from a sky that was low and dark and serious, blanketing the highways and overpasses in white, turning the world into something silent and treacherous and new. Marcus left the hospital at 9:47 p.m. He had been called in for an emergency surgery at 4 in the afternoon. A 58-year-old man with an aortic dissection who would have died within the hour without intervention. Marcus had been at his in-laws' house with Sarah and their daughter Emma when the call came. Sarah had given him the look that was equal parts understanding and resignation. The look of a surgeon's wife who had learned long ago that Christmas and birthdays and anniversaries were always conditional, always subject to the tyranny of a ringing phone. Marcus had kissed her forehead and said, "I'll be home by 10. Save me some pie." The surgery had gone perfectly. Of course it had. His surgeries always went perfectly. He had repaired the torn aorta with the precision of a watchmaker and the confidence of a man who believed that his hands were the last line of defense between life and death. The patient was stable in the ICU. The family had wept with gratitude. The on-call resident had looked at Marcus with the wide-eyed reverence that Marcus had grown accustomed to and said, "Dr. Chen, that was the most incredible thing I've ever seen." Marcus had smiled, thanked him, and headed for the parking garage. The drive from Seattle Pacific Medical Center to his home in Bellevue was normally 35 minutes. In this snow, it would be closer to an hour. Marcus did not mind. He was tired but satisfied, riding the quiet high that always followed a successful surgery. The feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was made to do. He turned on the radio. A station was playing "Oh Holy Night," and Marcus found himself humming along, not because the words meant anything to him, not really, but because the melody was beautiful, and the night was beautiful, and he was a man who had just saved a life on Christmas Eve, and that felt like enough. Interstate 90 was nearly empty. The snow had chased most drivers off the road, and the ones who remained moved slowly, cautiously, their headlights creating pale tunnels in the falling white. Marcus was in the left lane, doing 40 in a 65 zone, his wipers working hard against the accumulating snow. The road crossed Lake Washington on a floating bridge, and the wind off the water pushed the snow sideways, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Marcus leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel, squinting through the windshield at the fading taillights of the car ahead of him. He did not see the truck. No one could have seen the truck. It was an 18-wheeler carrying a load of lumber from eastern Washington, driven by a man named Earl Hobson, who had been on the road for 14 hours and whose tires had lost traction on a patch of black ice 300 yards ahead of Marcus's car. The truck had jackknifed, swinging across both lanes of the highway like a gate slamming shut, and it was sliding toward Marcus at an angle that left no room for evasion, no time for reaction, no margin for the golden hands to do what they did best, control the outcome. Marcus saw the truck's headlights first, two massive blinding lights appearing out of the snow directly in front of him, impossibly close, impossibly fast. His hands, his famous hands, his 10,000 surgery hands, jerked the steering wheel to the right in a reflexive attempt to avoid the impact. But the road was ice, and the car did not respond to his commands. And in the last fraction of a second before the collision, Marcus had a thought that was so clear and so complete that it seemed to exist outside of time. I am not in control. The impact was catastrophic. Marcus's sedan struck the side of the truck at approximately 35 miles per hour, which does not sound fast until you understand that speed is relative, and the truck was sliding toward him at 15, a combined closing speed of 50 miles per hour, concentrated on the front driver's side of a vehicle that weighed 3,000 pounds, hitting a vehicle that weighed 80,000. The airbags deployed. The windshield shattered. The steering column collapsed, and Marcus's hands, which had been gripping the steering wheel at the moment of impact, absorbed a force that no human hand was designed to withstand. What happened to those hands in the next 3 seconds would take surgeons 2 days to fully catalog. Both wrists were shattered, not fractured, but shattered. The bones reduced to fragments. The tendons in 8 of his 10 fingers were severed. The median and ulnar nerves in both arms sustained crush injuries that destroyed the delicate myelin sheaths protecting them. The metacarpal bones in his right hand were pulverized. The left hand fared slightly better, but still sustained injuries that would have ended the career of any surgeon on Earth. Marcus did not feel the pain immediately. That would come later, in waves that made him scream into his pillow at 3 in the morning. What he felt, in the seconds between impact and unconsciousness, was a strange, dislocated awareness. He was aware that the car was no longer moving. He was aware that there was glass in his hair and blood on the dashboard. He was aware that the radio was still playing, tinny and distant, and the voice singing "O Holy Night" was reaching the crescendo. Fall on your knees, oh hear the angel voices. And he was aware of his hands. He lifted them, or tried to, and what he saw in the dim light of the crumpled dashboard was something from a nightmare. Blood, bone, angles that were wrong, fundamentally wrong, the architecture of 20 years of surgical precision reduced to ruin. He tried to move his fingers. His right hand did not respond at all. His left hand produced a twitch, a single, pathetic tremor in his index finger that sent a bolt of agony up his arm and into his brain. And in that moment, lying in a crushed car on a frozen bridge on Christmas Eve, Dr. Marcus Chin understood something that he had spent 20 years refusing to understand. He was not in control. He had never been in control. The golden hands were not golden. They were flesh and bone, as fragile and temporary as everything else in this broken world. And the man who had made those hands his God was now watching his God die in front of his eyes. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the snow falling through the broken windshield, landing on his ruined hands, each flake dissolving into the warm blood and disappearing, as if the world itself were crying. And the last thing he thought, before consciousness slipped away like water through those shattered fingers, was not a prayer and not a curse, but a question that echoed through the void as he fell. Who am I now? Marcus woke up 3 days later, not the way people wake up in movies, with a gasp and a sudden sitting up and immediate clarity. He surfaced slowly, like a diver rising from deep water, passing through layers of darkness and confusion and pain, so much pain, before finally breaking through into the harsh, fluorescent reality of the intensive care unit at Harborview Medical Center. The room was beige and sterile and filled with the steady beeping of monitors that Marcus knew intimately because he had spent 20 years interpreting their language for other people. Now they were speaking about him, his blood pressure, his heart rate, his oxygen saturation, the vital signs of Dr. Marcus Chin, patient, not physician. Sarah was there. Of course she was. She was sitting in the chair beside his bed, holding a styrofoam cup of cold coffee, and she looked like she had not slept in 3 days, which she had not. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her clothes wrinkled. But when she saw his eyes open, when she saw him blink against the light and try to focus, her face transformed. Not with relief exactly, though there was relief. with something more complicated. The look of a woman who has been sitting beside a precipice for 72 hours and has just watched the person she loves most take one step back from the edge. Marcus. Her voice cracked on his name. You're awake. You're okay. You were in an accident. A car accident on I-90. You've been unconscious for 3 days, the doctors said. But Marcus was not listening because he had looked down. He had looked down at his hands, and what he saw made the words die in the air between them, made the beeping monitors fade to silence, made the whole world contract to a single, devastating image. 2 lumps of bandage, white and thick and shapeless, resting on the hospital blanket where his hands should have been. They looked like mittens, like the cotton mittens his mother used to put on him when he was a boy in the Minnesota winters. But these were not mittens. These were tombs. He tried to move his fingers. The right hand produced nothing, no movement, no sensation, nothing. The left hand offered a faint, fiery twitch that sent pain shooting up to his shoulder. Marcus stared at the bandages and felt something collapse inside him. Something foundational. Something load-bearing, like a building losing its central column. Everything above it, his identity, his purpose, his confidence, his sense of self, came crashing down. My hands, he said. It was not a question. Sarah's face told him everything before the doctors did. But the doctors told him anyway. Dr. Rebecca Lim, the head of orthopedic surgery at Harborview, sat on the edge of his bed and spoke in the careful, measured tone that Marcus himself had used 10,000 times to deliver bad news. Marcus, we performed 2 surgeries to repair the damage. Dr. Tanaka flew in from the Mayo Clinic for the nerve reconstruction. We did everything we could. Everything. She paused. She was choosing her words the way a person choosing their steps through a minefield. The bone fractures will heal. With physical therapy, you'll regain functional use of both hands. You'll be able to dress yourself, feed yourself, write, drive. But the nerve damage to both the median and ulnar nerves is extensive. The fine motor control required for surgery. She stopped. She could not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Marcus finished it for her. I'll never operate again. It was not a question. Dr. Lim bowed her head. I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry. What happened in the weeks that followed was a descent. Not a gradual decline, but a plummeting, a free fall into a darkness that Marcus had never known. Existed because he had spent his entire adult life flying so high above it. He was transferred to a rehabilitation facility in Kirkland, a cheerful, well-appointed place with motivational posters on the walls and physical therapists who smiled too much, and occupational therapists who said things like, let's focus on what you can do, with a brightness that made Marcus want to throw things. Except he could not throw things because he could not grip things because his hands were destroyed. Physical therapy was a daily exercise in humiliation. Tasks that a 5-year-old could perform without thinking, picking up a coin, turning a doorknob, buttoning a shirt, became impossible mountains that Marcus spent hours failing to climb. His physical therapist, a patient young man named Kevin, would set a small rubber ball on the table and say, "Try to pick it up, Marcus. Just try." And Marcus would stare at the ball and command his fingers to close around it, send the signal from his brain to his hands, the same signal he had sent 1,000,000 times, the signal that had guided scalpels and sutures and saved 10,000 lives. And his fingers would twitch and tremble and fail, and the ball would sit on the table, untouched, mocking him. "Maybe we should try something simpler," Kevin would say. "Simpler?" Marcus's voice was a blade. "I used to suture a coronary artery with thread thinner than a human hair. I used to repair heart valves the size of a quarter through an incision the size of a dime. And you want me to pick up a rubber ball and call that progress?" Kevin, to his credit, did not flinch. "Marcus, I understand this is. You don't understand anything. You're 26 years old. You've never held a human heart in your hands. You've never been the only thing standing between a child and death. You have no idea what I've lost. None. Marcus knew he was being cruel. He knew that Kevin was a good man, doing his best. But the anger was too big, too hot, too all-consuming to be contained by courtesy. It came out of him in bursts, like steam from a pressure valve, scalding everyone it touched. He snapped at Kevin. He snapped at the nurses. He snapped at Sarah when she visited, which was every day, which was more than he deserved. "You can find a new purpose, Marcus," Sarah said one afternoon, sitting beside his wheelchair in the rehabilitation garden. "God has a plan." Marcus turned on her with a fury that shocked them both. "A plan? Don't talk to me about God's plan, Sarah. I spent 20 years saving lives with these hands. I was doing God's work, his actual work, healing the sick. And this is how he repays me? By destroying the one tool I had? What kind of God does that? What kind of plan requires me to lose the only thing that mattered?" Sarah absorbed the blow, the way she absorbed all of his blows during this period, with a grace that was not weakness, but a strength so deep it was invisible. She did not argue. She did not cry, though she would cry later, alone, in the car, before driving home to their daughter. She simply said, "The only thing that mattered, Marcus? Is that what you really believe?" He did not answer. He could not, because the question had found the wound beneath the wound, the truth beneath the anger, the confession that he had been making with every outburst and every bitter word, but had not yet been able to say plainly, yes. His hands were the only thing that mattered. His hands were his identity. His hands were his worth. His hands were his God. And his God was dead. Lying in a hospital bed with ruined hands and a ruined career, Marcus Chin was not just grieving the loss of his surgical ability. He was grieving the loss of the only thing he had ever truly worshipped. Late at night, when the rehabilitation center was quiet and the halls were dim and the other patients were sleeping, Marcus would wheel himself to the small chapel at the end of the corridor. It was a simple room, a few pews, a wooden cross on the wall, a stained glass window that caught the street lights outside and cast faint colors on the floor. Marcus did not go there to pray. He went there to rage. He would sit in his wheelchair in front of that cross and let the anger pour out of him like water from a broken pipe. Where are you? Where were you on that bridge? 20 years I gave you. 20 years of healing people in your name. And you let a truck take it all away? What am I supposed to do now? Who am I supposed to be? You made me a surgeon. You gave me these hands, and then you took them back. Why? Tell me why. I'm waiting. I've been waiting for weeks, and there's nothing. Just silence. The same silence you gave every patient I ever lost. The same silence you gave every family I ever told that their loved one was gone. Silence. That's all you got. The cross said nothing. The chapel said nothing. The night said nothing. And Marcus sat in the darkness and the silence and felt the full weight of what it means to be a man who has lost his God and has not yet found the real one. Marcus first noticed Tommy Park on a Tuesday morning in February, 6 weeks into his stay at the rehabilitation center. He was wheeling himself back from a particularly brutal physical therapy session, one in which he had failed to pick up the rubber ball for the 37th consecutive time, and his mood was darker than the Seattle sky outside. He was passing through the recreation room, a large, bright space with tables and games and a television that was always tuned to a channel no one was watching, when he heard laughter. Not polite, restrained, hospital-appropriate laughter. Real laughter. The kind that comes from the belly and takes over the whole body, and is so infectious that even the sourness in Marcus's chest loosened for a moment at the sound of it. He stopped his wheelchair and looked. There was a boy sitting at a table in the center of the room, a boy of about 12, thin and small for his age, with black hair that stuck up in every direction, and dark eyes that sparkled with an energy that seemed to radiate outward and fill the room. He was playing chess, and he was playing it with his feet, because Tommy Park had no arms. He had been born with bilateral upper limb amelia, a rare congenital condition that results in the complete absence of both arms from birth. No shoulders, no elbows, no wrists, no hands, just a torso that ended where most people's arms began. And this boy, this armless 12-year-old in a Seahawks jersey and basketball shorts, was sitting in a chair with his bare feet on the table, his toes gripping a chess piece with the dexterity of a jeweler, moving it across the board with absolute confidence, while the man across from him, an amputee veteran in his 50s, stared at the board with the bewildered expression of someone who is losing badly and cannot figure out how. "Check," Tommy said, and grinned. The veteran shook his head. "Kid, how are you this good?" "Practice," Tommy said. "Also, I'm a genius, but mostly practice." The room erupted in laughter again. Patients, staff, a janitor who had stopped mopping to watch. Everyone was laughing, not at Tommy, but with him, pulled into the orbit of a boy whose joy was so genuine and so unapologetic that it bypassed every defense mechanism in the room. Everyone except Marcus. Marcus was not laughing. He was staring at this child who had never had what Marcus had lost, who had never known the feeling of fingers closing around an object, who had never held anything in his hands because he had never had hands, and who was radiating more happiness than Marcus had felt in 6 weeks. It did not make sense. It offended something in Marcus's grief logic, the internal system that insisted his pain was special and his loss was the worst loss, and no one could understand, and no one had the right to be happy in his presence. Marcus turned his wheelchair and headed for his room. He did not want to be in the same space as Tommy Park. He did not want to see a child without arms smiling when a grown man without functional hands could not find a reason to live. But over the following days, Tommy proved impossible to avoid. The boy was everywhere. In the cafeteria, eating breakfast with his feet with a skill that put most able-handed diners to shame. In the therapy gym, doing stretches and exercises with an enthusiasm that exhausted his physical therapist. In the hallway, zooming past in a wheelchair he operated with his chin, calling out greetings to everyone he passed, as if the rehabilitation center were a neighborhood, and every person in it were his friend. And somehow, inexplicably, irritatingly, Tommy took a particular interest in Marcus. He would appear at Marcus's door at odd hours, leaning in with that irrepressible grin. "Hey, Dr. Chan, want to play chess?" "No." "Want to watch a movie?" "No." "Want to hear a joke?" "No." "Okay, I'll tell you one anyway. Why did the surgeon go to art school?" "Because he lost his patience." Marcus stared at him. "That's terrible." "Yeah, but you almost smiled. I saw it. Your mouth moved. That counts." Marcus closed his door. But there was, against his will, the faintest tug at the corner of his lips. It went on like this for 2 weeks. Tommy advancing, Marcus retreating. The boy's persistence was extraordinary. Not aggressive, not pushy, but relentless in the way that water is relentless, finding every crack, seeping through every defense. He talked to Marcus in the cafeteria, even when Marcus refused to answer. He waved at Marcus from across the therapy gym. He drew pictures with his feet, elaborate, colorful drawings of superheroes and spaceships, and slid them under Marcus's door, with notes written in shaky but legible toe script. "For the grumpy doctor," from Tommy. And then, one afternoon, 3 weeks after their first encounter, Marcus was sitting in the recreation room, alone, staring at a jigsaw puzzle he could not do because his fingers could not grip the pieces, when Tommy appeared beside him. The boy did not say anything for a moment. He just stood there, looking at the puzzle, and then at Marcus's bandaged hands, and then back at the puzzle. Then he sat down, lifted his foot to the table, gripped a puzzle piece between his first and second toe and placed it perfectly into position. "You know," Tommy said, not looking at Marcus, but at the puzzle, "when I was little, I used to ask God why he didn't give me arms. Every night. God, why don't I have arms like the other kids? Why am I different?" And you know what I felt him say to me one night? Marcus said nothing, but he was listening. For the first time in weeks, he was truly listening. He said, "Tommy, I didn't forget your arms. I just gave you something better." And I didn't understand what he meant. Not for a long time, but then I figured it out. He gave me a heart that works. Not a heart like the kind you fix, Dr. Chin. A heart like the kind that loves people. I can't hold things, but I can hold people's attention. I can't grab stuff, but I can grab people when they're falling. Not with hands, with words, with jokes, with just being there. Tommy placed another puzzle piece. Then he looked at Marcus with those dark, clear, 12-year-old eyes that held a wisdom no medical school could confer. "Dr. Chin, you lost your hands. That's really, really sad. I get it. But you didn't lose your heart. And I'm not talking about the muscle in your chest. I'm talking about the part of you that made you want to be a doctor in the first place. The part that cares about people. You still have that. Your hands were just the delivery system. But there are other ways to deliver." Marcus opened his mouth to say something dismissive. Something about how Tommy was 12 and did not understand the complexities of adult professional identity and the sunk cost of 2 decades of surgical training. But the words did not come. What came instead, rising up from somewhere beneath the anger and the grief and the months of darkness, was a sensation he had not felt in so long that he barely recognized it. A crack. A tiny hairline fracture in the wall he had built between himself and everything else. And through that crack, so faint it was barely perceptible, came something warm. Something that felt dangerously, terrifyingly close to hope. "How do you do it?" Marcus asked. His voice was rough. "How are you this happy? You've never had arms. You'll never have arms. How can you sit there and smile and tell jokes and play chess with your feet and act like everything is fine?" Tommy's grin softened into something more serious, more adult, but not less joyful. "Because everything is fine, Dr. Chin. I have God. I have my mom. I have chess and jokes and really talented toes. And I have people around me who need someone to make them laugh. That's enough. That's more than enough. Having arms would be cool, I guess. But not having them taught me something that most people with arms never learn. You don't need hands to hold someone up. You just need to show up and care." Marcus looked at this boy, this armless, fearless, inexplicably radiant boy. And for the first time in months, the tears that fell from his eyes were not tears of anger or self-pity. They were tears of something he could not yet name, but that Tommy Park could have identified in an instant, because Tommy had been living in it his whole life. Grace, the unearned, undeserved, unexplainable grace of a God who gives different gifts to different people and asks only that they use what they have been given to love the person in front of them. That night, after the rehabilitation center had settled into its nighttime quiet, after the last medication rounds had been made and the hallway lights had been dimmed to their soft nocturnal glow, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed and stared at his hands. Not with anger this time, not with grief, with something that was almost curiosity, as if he were seeing them for the first time. These bandaged, broken, useless things that had once been his identity. These lumps of scarred flesh and damaged nerve that could not pick up a rubber ball, let alone hold a scalpel. He looked at them the way you look at a familiar landscape after a flood, recognizing the shape of things, but understanding that everything has changed, and the map you used to carry is no longer accurate. Tommy's words were still moving through him, turning over and over, like stones in a river. smoothing the sharp edges of thoughts that had been cutting him for months. Your hands were just the delivery system. But there are other ways to deliver. What had that 12-year-old boy seen that a 42-year-old surgeon had missed? How had a child born without arms grasped something that a man who had lost the use of his own could not reach? The answer was so simple that Marcus almost missed it, the way you almost miss the sun because you have been staring at a flashlight. Tommy had never confused the tool with the purpose. He had never believed that the delivery system was the message. He had understood from the beginning, with the natural clarity that children sometimes have before. The world teaches them to complicate things, that the purpose of a life is not what you do with your hand, it is what you do with your heart. Marcus lowered his head, not in defeat, in surrender, and for the first time in years, the first real time, with no audience and no performance, and no carefully crafted words designed to sound humble while actually celebrating himself, Marcus Chin prayed. It was not eloquent. It was not polished. It was not the kind of prayer that a man says in a church when other people are listening. It was messy and broken and honest, the way real conversations always are when the pretense has been stripped away and there is nothing left but the raw truth between two people who have been apart too long. God, he paused. The word felt strange in his mouth, like a language he had once spoken fluently, but had not used in so long that his tongue had forgotten the shapes. God, I don't know if you're listening. I haven't given you much reason to listen. I've been saying your name for 20 years, but I haven't been talking to you. I've been performing. I've been using you like a prop, like a line in a speech, something to say to reporters and church groups to make myself look good. And you know that. You've always known that. He swallowed. His damaged hands trembled in his lap. I'm angry at you. I should be honest about that. I'm furious. I had something precious, and you let it be taken from me. I had a gift, a purpose, a reason to get up every morning. And now I have nothing. I'm a surgeon who can't operate, a healer who can't heal. I'm nothing. The word hung in the air of the dark room. Nothing. And as it hung there, Marcus heard it, really heard it, for the first time. Not as a complaint, but as a confession, because that was the truth, wasn't it? Without his hands, without his career, without the golden nickname and the magazine covers and the reverential stares, Marcus Chin was nothing. And the reason he was nothing was that he had built his entire identity on something that could be taken away in a 35-mile-per-hour collision on a frozen bridge. He had built his house on his own hands, and the house had fallen. But maybe, Marcus whispered, and his voice cracked on the word, maybe that's the point. Maybe you're trying to show me something I was too proud to see. Maybe you're trying to teach me that I was never the healer. You were, and my hands were just the delivery system. Tommy's words again, coming out of his own mouth now, but transformed, deepened, filled with a meaning that the boy had instinctively understood, and that the man was only now beginning to grasp. I don't know what you want from me. I don't know what I'm supposed to do without my hands. I don't know who I am anymore, but I know who I was. And that man was not who you wanted me to be. That man was proud and self-centered and so in love with his own ability that he forgot where it came from. So here's what I have to offer. You nothing. I'm offering you nothing. My broken hands, my broken pride, my broken life. It's all I have. If you can do something with nothing, then do it. Because I can't. I've tried. I've been trying for 6 weeks, and I can't pick up a rubber ball, and I can't fix a single thing, and I can't even button my own shirt. So if there's anything left of me that you can use, it's yours. All of it. Whatever's left, it's yours. He sat in the silence that followed, not the angry, accusatory silence of his midnight chapel rants, A different silence. A listening silence. The silence of a man who has finally stopped talking and started paying attention. And in that silence, Marcus felt something. Not a voice. Not a vision. Not a supernatural experience that would make for a dramatic story. Something quieter. Something so subtle that if he had not been paying attention, if he had not been sitting in the dark, with his broken hands and his broken pride and his absolute utter emptiness, he would have missed it entirely. Peace. A warmth that started in the center of his chest and spread outward, slow and steady, like ink in water. Not an emotion exactly, more like a presence, more like the sensation of being in a room that you had thought was empty, and suddenly realizing that someone has been sitting quietly in the corner the whole time, waiting for you to notice, waiting for you to stop talking long enough to feel their warmth. Marcus did not understand it. The doctor in him wanted to analyze it, to measure it, to find the neurochemical explanation. The man in him just wanted to stay in it, to sit in this feeling the way you sit in a hot bath after a long, cold day, letting it seep into your bones, letting it thaw the parts of you that have been frozen for so long you forgot they existed. You sat there for a long time. He did not know how long. The clock on his nightstand said it was past midnight when he finally lay back on his pillow. His eyes were swollen from crying. His hands still throbbed with their constant dull ache. Nothing in his external circumstances had changed. He was still a surgeon who could not operate. He was still a man without a purpose. He was still broken. But something was different. Something fundamental had shifted. The way the earth shifts during a tremor, imperceptibly to the eye, but profoundly to the structures built upon it. The wall was cracked. The crack was small, but through it, light was streaming. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, for the first time since the truck and the snow and the sound of his own bones breaking, Marcus Chin slept. Not the fitful, nightmare-riddled, medication-assisted sleep of the previous weeks. Real sleep. Deep sleep. The sleep of a child who has cried himself out and been held and told that everything will be all right. The sleep of a man who has, after a very long absence, finally come close enough to God to rest in his shadow. And in the morning, when the gray light of a Seattle winter crept through the window and fell across the bed, Marcus opened his eyes and felt something he had not felt in months. He did not feel healed. He did not feel whole. He did not feel like a new man with a clear purpose and a roadmap for the future. He felt something simpler and, in many ways, more powerful. He felt willing to be shown, willing to be led, willing to admit that the man with the golden hands had been holding on too tight, and that maybe, just maybe, the most important thing those hands could do now was let go. It happened at 3:17 in the morning, 4 days after Marcus's prayer. He was pulled from sleep by a sound that penetrated his door and his dreams with equal urgency. A child screaming, not the scream of a nightmare that fades as consciousness returns. A deep, tearing, full-body scream of terror that went on and on. The kind of scream that triggers something primal in the nervous system of every adult within earshot. Marcus was on his feet before he was fully awake, a reflex honed by 20 years of responding to emergencies. And he was moving down the hallway toward the sound before he had time to remember that he was a patient now, not a doctor, and that responding to crises was no longer his job. The screaming was coming from Tommy's room. Marcus pushed the door open and saw the boy thrashing in his bed, his small body convulsing with the violence of whatever was happening inside his sleeping mind, his face contorted in an expression of pure, unfiltered fear. The nightlight cast a dim orange glow across the room, illuminating the posters on the walls, superheroes and basketball players and the stuffed animals arranged at the foot of the bed, and the 12-year-old boy who was trapped in a place that no poster or stuffed animal could reach. A nurse was already there, standing at the bedside, speaking in calm, measured tones. "Tommy, you're safe. You're in your room. It's just a dream, sweetie. You're okay." But Tommy was not okay. His eyes were open but unseeing, glazed with the particular vacancy of a child caught between sleep and waking, between the nightmare world and the real one. He was crying now. The screaming subsided into ragged, heaving sobs that shook his entire body. The nurse looked at Marcus. Her expression said what her words could not. "This happens regularly, and there is nothing we can do." Marcus did not think about what he did next. He did not plan it. He did not analyze it. He did not consult his medical training or his therapy notes or his understanding of pediatric psychology. He simply moved toward the bed the way water moves downhill, following gravity, following the pull of something deeper and more powerful than thought. He sat on the edge of Tommy's mattress. He looked at this boy, this extraordinary, armless, relentlessly joyful boy who had cracked open Marcus's wall with a chess game and a bad joke, and he saw past the bravery and the humor and the infectious smile to the thing underneath a 12-year-old child who was afraid of whatever demons visited him in the night, afraid of the loneliness that lives inside every person who is different, no matter how bravely they carry it during the day. Marcus lifted his damaged right hand, the hand that could not pick up a rubber ball, the hand that trembled when he tried to hold a fork, the hand that would never again close around a scalpel, and he placed it on Tommy's shoulder. It was the most natural gesture in the world, the most human, a hand on a shoulder, a touch that says, "I am here. You are not alone." And then, without planning it, without thinking it, without deciding it, Marcus prayed, out loud, his voice low and steady in the dim room, his useless hand resting on the shaking shoulder of a terrified child. "God, I'm here with Tommy. He's scared. You know what he's afraid of, even if I don't. So I'm asking you right now to be here with him, to take this fear away, to give him peace. The kind of peace you gave me the other night. The kind I can't explain and don't deserve. Give it to him. He's a good kid, God. He's the best kid I've ever met. Be close to him right now. Let him feel you here." Something happened. Marcus would spend a long time trying to understand it, and he would never fully succeed, because what happened in that room existed in a space beyond the reach of his medical vocabulary. The moment his hand touched Tommy's shoulder and the words of the prayer left his mouth, the boy's thrashing stopped, not gradually, instantly, like a switch being flipped. One moment, Tommy's body was rigid with terror, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his eyes wide and blind with nightmare. The next moment, he was still. His breathing slowed, his muscles relaxed. His face, which had been twisted in fear, softened into an expression of such profound peace that it looked almost like he was listening to music that only he could hear. Tommy's eyes focused. He looked up at Marcus. The fear was gone, completely gone, replaced by a calm that seemed too deep for a 12-year-old, a calm that seemed borrowed from somewhere ancient and infinite. "Dr. Chen," Tommy whispered. "You prayed for me?" "Yeah, buddy," Marcus said. His voice was thick. "I did. I felt it," Tommy said. "I felt something warm. Right here." He nodded toward the shoulder where Marcus's hand rested. "Like someone put a blanket on me, but from the inside." Marcus could not speak. His hand was still on Tommy's shoulder, and he was suddenly, intensely aware of something that he could not see, but could feel with a certainty that bypassed every skeptical circuit in his scientist's brain. His hand was warm, not the normal warmth of body temperature, a different warmth, a warmth that seemed to originate not in his hand, but through his hand, passing through the damaged nerves and the scarred tissue and the useless fingers like light through a window, And it was flowing into this child, and the child could feel it, and Marcus could feel it. And the room itself seemed to pulse with it, as if the air had thickened with something invisible and holy. The nurse stood at the door, her clipboard forgotten at her side, her mouth slightly open, her eyes moving between Marcus and Tommy with an expression that Marcus had seen before on the faces of medical students witnessing their first successful surgery. The expression of someone watching something they do not understand but know instinctively is important. Tommy was asleep within minutes. Not the restless, nightmare-prone sleep that the staff had come to expect. A deep, peaceful, untroubled sleep, with a small smile on his face, and his breathing steady and slow. Marcus carefully withdrew his hand, and even after he broke contact, the warmth lingered in his palm, fading slowly, like the afterglow of sunlight on the skin after stepping indoors. He stood up. His legs were unsteady. His mind was racing, but his heart was quiet, filled with a stillness that he recognized from 4 nights ago, from his prayer in the dark room, from the moment he had felt the presence in the corner. The nurse was still standing in the doorway. Her name tag said Jessica. Her eyes said 1,000 things. "Dr. Chen," she said softly, "what did you do?" "Tommy has night terrors 3-4 times a week. When he gets one, he usually screams for 20-30 minutes. We've tried everything. Medication, weighted blankets, white noise machines. Nothing works. You were in there for 2 minutes, and he just stopped." Marcus looked at her. He looked down at his hand, the broken, trembling, useless hand that could not pick up a rubber ball, but had just transmitted something that no surgical instrument in his career had ever carried. And he said the only honest thing he could say, "I don't know. I prayed. That's all I did. I put my hand on his shoulder and I prayed." Jessica looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Tommy, sleeping peacefully, the smile still on his face. Then she looked back at Marcus, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears or might have been wonder, or might have been both. "Doctor," she said quietly, "I've worked here for 8 years. I've seen a lot of things, but I've never seen that." Marcus walked back to his room. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked at his hands. These broken hands, these useless, scarred, nerve-damaged hands that would never again hold a scalpel or tie a suture or repair a mitral valve. These hands that had just done something that no surgery, no medication, no medical technology on earth could explain. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, for the first time since the truck and the snow and the breaking, Marcus Chen did not look at his hands and see what was lost. He looked at them and saw, dimly, like the first light of dawn through heavy clouds, what might be found. The word spread the way words always spread in closed communities, quickly, breathlessly, and with the particular intensity reserved for things that people want to believe but are afraid to say out loud. Within days, everyone in the rehabilitation center knew about what had happened in Tommy's room. The nurse Jessica had told the other nurses. The nurses had told the physical therapist. The physical therapist had told their patients. And the patients had told each other in whispered conversations over meals and in the hallways and in the recreation room, where Tommy still played chess with his feet and won. The surgeon prayed for the kid, and the nightmares stopped. No, it wasn't just the nightmares. He touched him, and the kid felt heat, like actual heat. I heard Dr. Chen used to be a big-shot heart surgeon before the accident. Someone said his hands were glowing. That's ridiculous. Is it, though? Marcus was horrified. He had spent his entire career in the clean, controlled, evidence-based world of medicine, where effects had causes and outcomes had data, and if you could not measure it, it did not count. And now people were talking about him as if he were a faith healer, a televangelist, a miracle worker in a hospital gown. It was everything he had been trained to reject. It was the opposite of everything he had built his professional life upon. And it terrified him, not because he did not believe it, but because in the deepest and most frightening part of his heart, he did. The first person to ask him directly was Mrs. Gutierrez, a 67-year-old woman recovering from a hip replacement in the room across the hall. She was a small, fierce Salvadoran grandmother with a chronic pain condition that had not responded to any of the medications the doctors had tried. She cornered Marcus in the cafeteria one morning, her walker blocking his wheelchair like a roadblock, and she looked at him with dark eyes that were simultaneously desperate and commanding. "Dr. Chan, I heard what you did for the boy. I have pain. Here in my hip, and here in my back, and here in my head, all the time, for 11 years. The doctors give me pills. The pills don't work. I want you to pray for me." Marcus's first instinct was to refuse. "Mrs. Gutierrez, I'm not a pastor. I'm not a healer. What happened with Tommy was, I don't even know what it was. It was probably just coincidence. He was tired. He would have calmed down on his own." Mrs. Gutierrez was unimpressed. "The nurse said Tommy has not had a nightmare since. 4 nights. She said that has never happened. Not once in 2 years. That is not coincidence. That is God. And if God is using your hands, then I want your hands on my hip, and I want you to ask him to take this pain away." "Ms. Gutierrez, I can't." "You can't operate," she said bluntly. "I know, but you can pray, can't you?" Marcus stared at her, and in that moment, he heard Sarah's voice in his memory, gentle and persistent and right. "You can find a new purpose, Marcus. God has a plan." And he heard Tommy's voice. "Your hands were just the delivery system, but there are other ways to deliver." And he heard his own voice from that night in the dark room, offering God the only thing he had left, nothing. He prayed for Mrs. Gutierrez, right there in the cafeteria, with patients eating oatmeal and staff refilling coffee and a television in the corner showing a morning talk show. He placed his damaged hands on her shoulder and he prayed, simply and honestly, the way he had prayed for Tommy. No performance, no polish, just a man asking God to do what a man could not. When he finished, Mrs. Gutierrez was crying. "The pain," she said, and her voice was shaking. "The pain in my hip, it's less. It's not gone, but it's less. Dr. Chen, in 11 years, nothing has made it less." Marcus did not know what to say. He still does not know what to say when things like this happen. And they happen with a regularity now that makes silence the only honest response. But that morning in the cafeteria, watching a grandmother weep with relief after 11 years of pain, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not the dramatic earthquake shift of his prayer in the dark room. Something quieter, a settling, like a compass needle finding north, like a man who has been walking in the wrong direction for a very long time, and has finally, without fanfare, turned around. After Mrs. Gutierrez, there were others. A stroke patient who had lost the ability to speak regained partial speech after Marcus prayed with him. A young woman with crippling anxiety reported sleeping through the night for the first time in months. An amputee veteran who had been suicidal told his therapist that after Dr. Chen prayed for him, the darkness had lifted. Not entirely, not permanently, but enough to see through. Enough to want to keep going. Marcus was terrified by all of it, not by the results, which were undeniable, documented in patient charts and witnessed by medical staff, but by the implication. Because if this was real, if something was actually happening when his damaged hands touched people and his imperfect lips prayed imperfect prayers, then it meant that the healing had never been about his skill. It had never been about the golden hands. It had been about something flowing through him, something he had taken credit for during 20 years of surgical success, and something he could not take credit for now because his hands were ruins. The instrument, had changed. The power had not, which meant the power had never been his. Sarah visited on a Saturday afternoon and found him in the recreation room, surrounded by a small group of patients and staff, all sitting in a circle, all with their heads bowed. He was praying. His bandaged hands were resting on the knee of a woman beside him, and the woman was weeping quietly. And the room was charged with something that Sarah recognized immediately, because she had felt it in churches and prayer groups, and in her own kitchen at midnight when she was on her knees for her husband. The presence of God. She stood in the doorway and watched, and did not interrupt. And when the prayer was over and the group dispersed, she walked up to Marcus and took his face in her hands and kissed him. "There you are," she said. "I've been waiting for you." "Sarah," Marcus said, and his voice carried a weight that was not sadness, but a strange and humble wonder. "I think God is using me. I think He's actually using me. Not because of my hands, in spite of them. And I don't understand it. I don't understand any of it. But I think I'm supposed to stop trying to understand and just let it happen." Sarah smiled. It was the first real smile he had seen from her since before the accident. The smile of a woman whose midnight prayers had been answered in a way she had not expected, but had always hoped for. "Marcus, that's called faith," she said. "Welcome home." Marcus had been at the rehabilitation center for 4 months when Sarah called. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and her voice on the phone was the voice of a woman trying very hard to hold something together that was falling apart. Marcus knew that voice. He had heard it on the night of the accident, and he had heard it in the weeks afterward. And he had thought he would never hear it again because the worst was supposed to be over. But the worst was not over. The worst was standing in the doorway, wearing a new face. "Marcus, it's Emma." A pause. A breath that shuddered on the way in. The blood work came back. "Dr. Patterson wants to see us both tomorrow morning. He said it's important." Emma, their daughter, 16 years old, bright, fierce, stubborn in the way that only teenage girls can be, with her mother's green eyes and her father's analytical mind. She wanted to be a marine biologist. She had a poster of the Great Barrier Reef on her bedroom wall and a stack of college brochures on her desk, and a future that stretched out before her like an ocean, wide and blue and full of possibility. Except that her blood work had come back wrong, and Dr. Patterson, an oncologist, wanted to see them. The diagnosis was acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Dr. Patterson delivered it in his office with the same careful, measured tone that Marcus had used 10,000 times. And Marcus sat there and listened to the words as if they were being spoken in a language he had never learned. White blood cell count, bone marrow biopsy, treatment protocol, response rates, survival statistics. Words that Marcus knew better than most people alive. Words he could have explained and contextualized and placed in perfect clinical perspective, and they meant absolutely nothing. They were sounds, noises, static, because the girl sitting in the chair beside him, the girl with the Great Barrier Reef poster and the college brochures and the ocean future, was his daughter. And no amount of medical knowledge could bridge the distance between understanding a disease and feeling it devour the person you love most. Sarah was holding Emma's hand. Emma was staring straight ahead with the expression of a 16-year-old who is being told that her body has betrayed her and does not yet know how to process that information. She was not crying. She would cry later in her room with her face pressed into her pillow. And Marcus would stand outside her door and listen and feel a pain that made his shattered hands feel like a paper cut. They started treatment immediately. Chemotherapy, the poison that kills the cancer by nearly killing everything else. Emma lost her hair. She lost weight. She lost the energy that had defined her, the bright, relentless teenage energy that had filled their house with noise and music and arguments about curfew and declarations of independence, and all the beautiful, irritating, irreplaceable sounds of a child becoming an adult. The house grew quiet. The college brochures gathered dust. The poster of the Great Barrier Reef looked down from the wall at a girl who could barely walk to the bathroom. And Marcus, who had been discovering a new purpose, who had been learning to pray with authority and power, who had been watching patients improve under his damaged hands in ways that no medical chart could explain, found himself face to face with the question that every person of faith eventually encounters. Is it real when it counts the most? He could pray for strangers and believe. He could lay hands on patients he had never met and trust that God was working. But could he pray for his own daughter? Could he stand at the bedside of his own child and summon the faith that had moved mountains for other people? Or would the fear be too great and the stakes too high and the doubt too crushing? The answer came at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in June, when Marcus found himself in the hospital chapel at Children's Hospital in Seattle. Not the Rehabilitation Center chapel where he had raged at God months ago. A different chapel, a smaller one, with crayon drawings taped to the walls by children who were fighting battles no child should have to fight. He was alone. Sarah was upstairs with Emma, who was sleeping, or trying to sleep, in a hospital bed with an IV drip, feeding chemicals into her bloodstream that were supposed to save her life, but were currently destroying it. Marcus sat in a pew and looked at the cross on the wall and tried to pray, and could not. The words would not come. For weeks, the words had been flowing freely, naturally, for other people. But now, when it was Emma, when it was his child, when it was the one prayer that mattered more than all the others combined, the well was dry. Fear had sealed it shut. Because what if he prayed and nothing happened? What if the God who had healed strangers through his damaged hands looked at his daughter and said no? What if the silence that Marcus had raged against months ago returned, and this time it was not about his hands, but about his child's life? He sat in that chapel for a long time, hours. The night crawled past, and somewhere in the deepest part of the darkness, somewhere between the fear and the silence and the desperate, wordless groaning of a father's heart, Marcus stopped trying to pray the right prayer and simply fell apart. He slid off the pew and onto the floor and pressed his face against the cold tile and let the fear pour out of him like blood from an open wound. He did not pray in words. He prayed in sobs, in gasps, in the guttural, animal sound of a man who has reached the end of his own strength and has nowhere left to go but down. And on the floor of that chapel, with his face in the dust and his broken hands pressed flat against the tile and his heart torn open wider than any surgical incision he had ever made, Marcus Chen surrendered. Not the way he had surrendered in the rehabilitation center, which had been the surrender of a man losing his career. This was deeper. This was the surrender of a man placing his child on the altar. This was Abraham on the mountain. This was the prayer that costs everything. Not my will, Marcus whispered into the floor. Yours. Not my plan. Yours. If you take her, I will still worship you. I will be destroyed, but I will worship you. Because you are God, and I am not. And your ways are higher than my ways, and your thoughts are higher than my thoughts. And I trust you. I trust you with the only thing I have left. I trust you with my daughter. He lay on that floor until the first light of dawn came through the chapel window and painted a cross of gold on the wall above him. And then he stood up, washed his face in the bathroom, and walked upstairs to his daughter's room. Sarah was asleep in the chair. Emma was awake, pale and thin, looking out the window at the morning sky. "Dad," she said. Her voice was small, but steady. "I had a dream. A good one. There was a man made of light. He touched my hand, and he said, 'Don't be afraid. You're going to be fine.'" Marcus sat on the edge of her bed. He placed his broken hand on her forehead, and he prayed. Not with the desperation of the chapel floor, with the calm, quiet authority of a man who has surrendered everything and has nothing left to lose. "Lord, you heard my daughter. You sent her a dream. Now I'm asking you, heal her. In your name, by your power, heal my little girl. 3 days later, the oncologist ordered new blood work. Routine, part of the protocol. Marcus and Sarah sat in the waiting room and held each other's hands and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that prayer had not already said. Dr. Patterson came out with the results. His face was the face of a scientist, confronting data that did not fit the model. Marcus had seen that face before. He had worn it himself in the rehabilitation center when Tommy stopped screaming. I don't have an explanation for this, Dr. Patterson said. The leukemia cells are gone. Complete remission. I've run the test 3 times. The leukemia is gone. Sarah collapsed against Marcus's chest. Marcus held her with his damaged hands and closed his eyes and felt the tears come and let them come, and did not try to stop them. And Emma, upstairs, still in her hospital bed, still pale, still thin, but alive, 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 looked out the window at the Seattle sky and whispered to the man of light who had visited her dreams, "Thank you." 6 months later, Dr. Marcus Chen walked through the doors of Seattle Pacific Medical Center for the first time since Christmas Eve. He was not wearing scrubs. He was not carrying a surgical bag. He was not striding through the corridors with the confident, purposeful gait of a man who was about to hold someone's heart in his hands. He was walking slowly, almost tentatively, wearing a simple gray suit and a clergy collar that still felt strange against his neck, carrying a Bible that had replaced the medical journals in his briefcase, and heading for a room he had passed 1,000 times in 20 years of practice, but had never once entered. The hospital chapel, his new operating room. The decision to become a hospital chaplain had not been sudden. It had grown slowly over the months following Emma's healing, the way a tree grows, invisibly at first. Roots, pushing deep before anything shows above the surface. It had grown through conversations with Sarah, who saw what was happening before Marcus did. Through conversations with Tommy, who had been released from the rehabilitation center and who called Marcus every Sunday evening to check on him, a 12-year-old boy without arms, making sure a 42-year-old man was holding together. Through conversations with Mrs. Washington at the rehabilitation center, and Mrs. Gutierrez and the stroke patient and the veteran and all the others who had sat under Marcus's damaged hands and risen with something they could not explain but could not deny. And it had grown through conversations with God. Real conversations now, not performances, not speeches to an audience of one. The raw, honest, daily dialogue of a man who had been broken open and found that what poured out was not emptiness, but an ocean of need and an ocean of grace, meeting and mixing like rivers at a confluence. Marcus prayed in the morning. He prayed at night. He prayed in the car and in the shower and in the quiet moments between activities. He prayed the way he used to operate, with focus and intensity, and the conviction that what he was doing mattered, that lives hung in the balance, that the work was urgent and real. The hospital administration had been skeptical at first. Marcus Chen, the legendary surgeon, wanted to come back as a chaplain. Some of them thought it was a publicity stunt. Some thought it was a breakdown. The chief of medicine, Dr. Alan Whitfield, Marcus's old friend and golf partner, had taken him to lunch and said, as diplomatically as possible, "Marcus, are you sure about this? You could consult. You could teach. You could do research. You still have one of the best medical minds in the country. Why would you want to spend your days praying with patients?" Marcus had smiled, the new smile, the one that held no trace of the old arrogance, but was warmer and truer than anything the old Marcus had ever produced. "Alan, I spent 20 years fixing hearts with my hands, and I was good at it, but I never once asked a patient how their soul was doing. I never once prayed with a family before surgery. I never once sat with a dying patient and helped them face what was coming. I treated the organ and ignored the person. I fixed the pump and forgot the soul. And now my hands are broken and I can't fix pumps anymore. But I can do the other thing, the thing I should have been doing all along. Whitfield had stared at his salad for a long time. Then he said, quietly, "Marcus, when my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer last year, you know what helped her more than any treatment? The chaplain. Old Father Remy in the hospital chapel. He sat with her every week and prayed and listened and told her that God was bigger than the cancer. She said he saved her life, not her body, her life." He looked up. His eyes were bright. "If you can do for other patients what Remy did for Janet, then I'll push the paperwork through myself." And so Dr. Marcus Chen returned to Seattle Pacific Medical Center, not as a surgeon, but as a chaplain. His office was a small room next to the chapel, with a desk and 2 chairs, and a window that overlooked the parking garage instead of the operating suite. On the wall behind his desk, he hung his medical degrees, not out of vanity, but as a testament, a reminder of where he had been and what he had learned and what it had cost him to learn it. And next to the degrees, he hung his chaplaincy certification. And next to that, he hung a framed photograph of 2 hands, his hands scarred and damaged and trembling slightly, resting on the shoulder of a 12-year-old boy with no arms and the biggest smile in Seattle. His days were nothing like his old days. Instead of performing surgeries that lasted 12 hours, he sat with patients for 20 minutes, or an hour, or however long they needed. Instead of reading ECGs and lab results, he read scripture and listened to fears and held hands and wiped tears. Instead of giving orders to a surgical team, he received referrals from doctors who had exhausted their medical options and were looking for something that no pharmaceutical company could provide. The referrals came cautiously at first. A nurse who whispered in the hallway, "Dr. Chen, there's a patient in 412 who's been crying for 3 days. The psych consult didn't help. Would you talk to her?" Then more openly, a surgeon who called his office and said, with the clinical detachment that masked something deeper, "Marcus, I have a patient, end-stage pancreatic cancer. Family is falling apart. I've done everything I can medically. Is there anything you can do?" And Marcus would go. He would sit at the bedside and he would listen and he would pray. He would place his broken hands on the patient's shoulder or head or hand, and he would ask God to do what Marcus Chen, M.D., no longer could. And things happened. Not always dramatic things, not always instantaneous things, but things. A peace that settled over a room like a blanket, a pain that lessened without medication, a fear that dissolved, a family that stopped fighting and started holding each other, a patient who had been given 6 weeks who lived 6 months, a man who had been paralyzed by depression, who woke up the next morning and said, "Something changed last night. I want to live." His former colleagues watched this transformation with reactions that ranged from admiration to bewilderment to something that looked, if you caught them in the right moment, like envy. They were brilliant people, skilled people, people who saved lives every day with their own golden hands. But they could see, as Marcus himself had been forced to see, that there was a dimension of healing that their training did not cover. A dimension that could not be accessed through a surgical incision or a prescription pad. And the man who was accessing it now was not a theologian or a mystic. He was one of them. A surgeon, a scientist, a man who understood evidence and data and the limitations of the human body. A man who had lost everything and found something that his most advanced colleagues could not explain and could not deny. Marcus started a weekly prayer group for hospital staff. Doctors, nurses, technicians, janitors, anyone who wanted to come. They met on Tuesday mornings at 6 before the day shift began in the hospital chapel. They prayed for patients. They prayed for each other. They prayed for the strength to face another day of beautiful, heartbreaking, sacred work. The group grew from 8 to 20 to 50. Some came out of faith. Some came out of despair. Some came out of curiosity. All of them left with something they did not have when they arrived, the awareness that they were not alone in the work, and the work was not only theirs. "I'm still a doctor," Marcus told Sarah one evening as they sat on the porch of their Bellevue home, watching Emma, healthy and strong, her hair growing back in dark curls, kicking a soccer ball in the yard. "I'm still healing people. I'm just using different instruments. My hands can't hold a scalpel anymore, but they can hold someone's hand while they're dying. And I'm starting to think that might be the harder surgery, and the more important one." 3 years have passed since a snowy highway and a pair of headlights ended the career of Dr. Marcus Chen, the man with the golden hands. 3 years since the truck. 3 years since the surgeon who had held 10,000 hearts in his palms woke up in a hospital bed and discovered that his palms could no longer hold anything at all. And in those 3 years, something has happened that Marcus could not have predicted, could not have planned, could not have engineered with even the most golden of hands. He has healed more people than he ever did with a scalpel. Not in the same way, not with the same tools, not with the precision and control that defined his surgical career. He has healed them the way a river heals a landscape, not by cutting through it, but by flowing through it, softening the hard places, nourishing the dry places, carrying away the debris that has been blocking the path for years. He has healed them with prayer and presence, and the paradox of broken hands that carry the power of an unbroken God. The invitation to speak at the National Medical Conference in Chicago came as a surprise to everyone except Sarah, who had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. The conference organizers wanted Marcus to deliver the keynote address, not to a room of pastors or a church auditorium, but to 3,000 medical professionals, surgeons, oncologists, neurologists, psychiatrists, emergency physicians, nurses, medical students. They wanted him to speak about what he called healing beyond medicine, the integration of spiritual care into medical practice. It was a topic that 5 years ago would have been laughed off the stage. But something was changing in the medical world. Studies were showing what chaplains and prayer warriors had known for centuries, that patients with active spiritual support recovered faster, experienced less pain, reported higher quality of life, and in some cases demonstrated outcomes that the data could not account for. And the man who embodied this truth more powerfully than anyone in the country was a former surgeon who could not button his own shirt without help, but who had become the most sought-after hospital chaplain in America. Marcus stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Convention Center and looked out at 3,000 faces, doctors in suits and residents in borrowed blazers and nurses in professional attire, all of them looking at him with the same expression, curious, skeptical, hopeful. The same expression, he realized, that his patients at the rehabilitation center had worn when they first asked him to pray for them. The expression of people who want to believe that there is something more, but are trained to trust only what they can measure. He began not with a lecture, but with a story. He held up his hands. The room was close enough to see the scars, the tremor, the fingers that would not fully straighten, the evidence of destruction. These hands performed over 10,000 surgeries, he said. They repaired hearts and saved lives and earned me a nickname and a magazine cover and a pride so deep I mistook it for purpose. And then, on Christmas Eve 3 years ago, on a frozen bridge in Seattle, God took them away. The room was silent. 3,000 people holding their breath. I spent months asking why. Why would God give me a gift and then destroy it? Why would he make me a healer and then take away my ability to heal? And I was angry. I was angrier than I have ever been in my life. I raged at God in hospital chapels. I cursed the hands that had betrayed me. I told my wife I had nothing left to offer, and I believed it. He paused. His eyes swept the room. And then a 12-year-old boy with no arms taught me something that 20 years of medical school never did. He smiled. The new smile, the real smile. He taught me that healing is not about the hands. It's about the heart. And I don't mean the cardiac muscle that we spend our careers trying to fix. I mean the part of us that connects to the part of our patients that no MRI can image and no surgery can reach. The part that is afraid. The part that is lonely. The part that lies awake at 3 a.m, wondering if there is a God, and if he cares, and if any of this means anything. Marcus stepped out from behind the podium. He walked to the edge of the stage, closer to the audience, close enough that they could see the tears forming in his eyes. I have learned something in the last 3 years that I want to share with you. Not as a preacher, not as a theologian, as a doctor, as a scientist, as a man who has spent his entire life dealing in evidence and data and measurable outcomes. I have learned that there is a dimension of healing that we have been ignoring, a dimension that cannot be accessed through an incision or a prescription, a dimension that operates on a frequency that our instruments cannot detect, but that our patients can feel. It is called the presence of God, and it is as real as the scalpel I used to hold. It is as real as the stethoscope around your neck. And it is available to every one of us, not just to chaplains and pastors, but to doctors and nurses and every person in this room who has ever felt the inadequacy of medicine in the face of human suffering. He held up his scarred hands again. These hands can't operate anymore. They can't tie sutures. They can't hold instruments. Most mornings I need my wife's help to get my shirt buttons through the holes. But I want to tell you what these hands can do. They can rest on the shoulder of a frightened patient and transmit something that no IV drip has ever carried. They can hold the hand of a dying man and be the bridge between this world and the next. They can fold in prayer and unlock doors that the most advanced surgical technology on earth cannot open. His voice grew stronger, not louder, fuller, richer, like a river that has found its true course. My colleagues, I am not asking you to stop practicing medicine. Medicine is a gift from God. Science is a gift from God. Your training, your skill, your dedication, these are sacred things. I am asking you to add something to your practice. I am asking you to treat the whole patient, not just the disease, to see the soul behind the symptoms. To recognize that when you have done everything medicine can do, and it is not enough, there is someone who can do what medicine cannot. And all you have to do is ask him. He looked down at his hands one final time, the scarred, trembling, broken, beautiful hands that had lost everything and found everything. I was the man with the golden hands, he said, and I thought the gold was mine. I thought I had earned it. I thought I owned it. I was wrong. The gold was never in my hands. It was in the one who made them. And when he took the gold away, he left something better. He left himself. In these broken, useless, shaking hands, God placed his own power. And it turns out that God's power in broken hands does more than my skill in golden ones ever did. The room erupted, not with polite professional applause, with the sound of 3,000 people rising to their feet and clapping and weeping and standing in the presence of a truth that transcended their training and their skepticism and their carefully maintained professional distance. In the front row, a young medical student was crying openly. A veteran oncologist was gripping the armrest of her chair with white knuckles. A surgical resident was staring at his own hands with an expression that Marcus recognized because he had worn it himself on the floor of a hospital chapel at 3 a.m. The expression of a man who has just realized that everything he thought was the point was actually the preparation. That evening, back at the hotel, Marcus sat on the bed with Sarah beside him. Emma, now 17 and healthy and planning her marine biology applications, had texted a string of heart emojis and the words, "Proud of you, Dad," Tommy had sent a video of himself playing chess with his toes and winning, with the caption, "Still got it. Call me." Marcus looked at his hands. 3 years of scars, 3 years of trembling, 3 years of not being able to do the one thing he had spent his life learning to do, and he would not trade a single day of it. Not one. Because the man who had lost his hands had found his purpose. And the purpose was not smaller than what he had lost. It was infinitely, immeasurably, incomprehensibly larger. "Sarah," he said softly. "I used to think God took my hands. And now?" Marcus smiled, the real smile, the one that had no performance in it, no pride, no pretense, just the quiet, settled, unshakable joy of a man who has been broken by love and rebuilt by grace. Now I think he opened them. If you are watching this and you are holding on to something so tightly that you have forgotten who gave it to you, if your identity is wrapped around your talent or your career or your success, I want you to hear what Marcus Chin learned on a frozen bridge on Christmas Eve. It is not yours. It was never yours. It is a gift. And the giver is bigger than the gift. And if he takes the gift away, it is not to punish you. It is to show you that he was the treasure all along. Not the talent, not the title, not the golden hands. Him. And if you are broken right now, if you feel like you have lost the one thing that made you who you are, I want you to hear what a 12-year-old boy with no arms told a surgeon with no future. Your hands were just the delivery system. There are other ways to deliver. God is not finished with you. He is just getting started. Share this with someone who needs to know that their brokenness is not the end. And if this story gave you hope, comment "New Beginning" below, because that is what God does best. He takes endings and turns them into beginnings. He takes broken hands and fills them with his power. And he takes empty lives and fills them with a purpose so big that no tragedy, no loss, no accident on a frozen highway could ever contain it. Your new beginning starts now.